Sí,
I think you can start. So thank you very much. So I have the pleasure to welcome you here, wherever you are in the world region where you are. And so I don't know whether to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but I should like to welcome you from Rome in the name of World Union of Catholic Women Organization, WUCWO. So we are going to continue with this cycle of formations on the magisterium of Pope Francis from the viewpoint of spirituality in order to answer to the call to holiness. This video conference is for WUCWO board members, but it is also open to all the member organizations of WUCWO, wherever they are. And they can follow us from Facebook, from our common home. Today we'll focus on Evangelii Gaudium with the help of an exceptional formator, Father Alexandre Mello. Welcome, Father, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Father Alexandre knows WUCWO very well, the only international public association of the faithful dedicated to women, recognized as such by the Holy See. As Professor Linda Ghisoni often says, WUCWO is a true existential observatory of women in the world. From our 60 organizations spread across all continents, even in times of pandemic, the approximately 8 million women are working at the grassroots level with a great love for the church to make present the face of the emerging church, both in the process of evangelization and in that of integral human development. And we wish to receive ongoing training to be able to represent this female face of the church in the international agencies where we have been officially represented for years. We are an organization founded by visionary women in 1910, and at the same time to collaborate closely with the Universal Church to the best of our ability. Just 2 words to explain why we chose you, dear Father, to speak about the female face of Evangelii Gaudium. Obviously, because you are the secretary of the dicastery for the laity, the family and life, WUCWO being an association with 99% lay people, but also because of the Marian spirituality of your Shetland roots and your life experience. In the book where you tell about your interview with the Pope Francis about Our Lady, she's my mother. Father Alexandre shows the background of Mariology that exists in the Holy Father's ecclesiological conception. And if I'm not mistaken, please correct me, Father, the interview inspired your doctoral thesis, whose recent publication is called precisely Mary Church, Mother of the Missionary People. And in it, it shows the Mariology behind Cardinal Bergoglio's conception of the Church, which took on a universal dimension when he was elected Pope in the document in which he presented. in which he presented the program for his pontificate, Evangelii Gaudium. Hence the title of this formation session. And Father Mello has accepted to share with us some traits of the women's face of Evangelii Gaudium. Dear Father, thank you very much. And now I should like to endorse to the ecclesiastical assistant, Father Gerald William, is going to introduce.
Yeah. Really, I just want to repeat the fond welcome to Father Alexandre Mello that the President General has already given. I might even repeat a little bit about what Maria Leah has just said when I talk a little bit about who is Father Mello to our members of the board and to members attending on Facebook. First of all, let me just say we have an excellent person to talk on this topic. Father Mello knows very well Evangelii Gaudium. And also, as I'm going to talk a little bit about his biography now, he has a deep sensibility for collaborating with lay people and with women. So he is a very appropriate person to talk on this theme of female spirituality and the Evangelii Gaudium. One reason I say that Father Alexandre is so at ease with lay people is that he is a Schoenstatt father. His priesthood is a part of what is called a federative spiritual family. So in an organized manner, you have lay people and the Schoenstatt priests. It's a movement of service of the poor, of youth, and they have quite a strong intellectual training, but they're very pastoral at the same time. So the sense of communicating to lay people in general and to women is very much part of what a Schoenstatt father is at ease in doing. Father Alexandre is from Brazil. His first work as a priest was as parish priest in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Father Alexandre, are you from that area yourself? I wasn't able to find. No, from another area. I let him say.
Rio. I'm from Rio de Janeiro.
Rio de Janeiro yourself, okay. Because of his working with the Schoenstatt fathers, he did quite a lot of his training for priesthood in Chile, where they're very strong. Then he did his doctorate in Mariology. As we heard, he's an expert on Mariology in Germany. He's a very pastoral man, but in fact, he's a very academic man as well. He has been a professor of theology in pastoral and systematic theology back in Brazil. Then something I want to mention is that I want to stress, he was involved with the General Assembly of the bishops of all of Latin America in Aparecida. And this is where he got to know Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, who comes from Argentina. He worked closely with Cardinal Bergoglio, who was the chairperson of the final document of Aparecida. This document was in 2007, a very important document for the future of the Church of Latin America, stating its direction. As Father Alexandre says, expressing the characteristics of the Latin American Church and getting all of it was 2007, getting all of the bishops agreeing that on a pastoral plan together. He describes what characterizes the Church of Latin America: ecclesial dynamism, the vitality of the laity, the enthusiasm of youth, support for the family institution, and a profound love of Mary. He also, being the professor as well, names a great intellectual of Latin America, Alberto Metol Ferré, who said that these qualities of Latin America are destined to make a contribution to the universal church. And Metol Ferré never lived to see the election of Pope Francis, But his vision was always that the Latin American church is becoming richer and richer, especially after Vatican II, and it has something to offer the rest of the world. So this was the position of the Aparecida document. Now, not many people know, I think, that there is a direct link between the Aparecida document and Evangelii Gaudium. You can compare the two texts. They're both on the internet, and you see, after all, Jorge Bergoglio is the main author of both documents. So this is what Methol Ferre predicted, that the richness of the Latin American church, as expressed in Aparecida, comes to the universal church through Pope Francis. And with Evangelii Gaudium, we really have his first and very important document. I consider it the manifesto for his pontificate. So here we have Father Alexandre, who worked closely with Bergoglio in writing the Aparecida document. Father Alexandre thought he was safely back in pastoral work when Pope Francis grabbed him and insisted that he comes to Rome against much personal interior resistance, as Father Alexandre says. But we joke, we who live in Rome, we say, they're the kind of people we want to come to Rome. So Father Alexandre, thank you so much for being with us. And we look forward now to hearing what you have to share of your wisdom with us.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Yo voy a hablar en español. Agradezco esta presentación tan generosa. En realidad, pueden quedar con la mitad de lo que se dijo.
For this very generous presentation. You could have contended with the half of you said. However, what I would like to stress is that I cherish Pope Francis, and I'm very happy to be able to talk about his apostolic exhortation. Now, I was asked to talk about the woman's face of Evangelii Gaudium with the subtitle Mary, the Church, and the Woman. According to the thinking of Pope Francis, because it seems that when we want to find a woman's face, we can find a lot the face of women. So it seems to me that this is the essential theme we're going to deal together. And I'd like to share with you the scheme of this presentation. It is very beautiful to listen and to receive questions. It is a joy to be here at this very moment through Linda Ghisoni. I've known about many of the things you did in Senegal, and I rejoice to be in contact with you through Linda Ghisoni. After introduction, I'd like to focus on Mariology of Pope Francis applied, and then get to the central theme of my presentation, the link between Mary and the Church. So the title, it's the title of my thesis, of my book, which is based on the interview mentioned by Maria Lia. She's my mother. And this was the result of my doctoral thesis. Mary, the Church, and the mother of the missionary people. So, and then the face of Mary, which illuminates the face of the Church and the face of all women. So these are the themes I'm going to share with you. I'd like to tell the interpreters that I will not be reading the text because the text I've prepared is a little bit longer. Now, exhortation Evangelii Gaudium November 2013 represents a synthesis of Pope Francis' program for his pontificate, the fruit of the synod on the new evangelization, led by Pope Benedict XVI. The new Pope had the capacity to unite his fundamental intuitions with those of the synod. In this sense, we find the main lines of his thought and of his project for the church. The same applies to his vision of women and the feminine. The fundamental reflection can be found in numbers 103 and 104 of the exhortation. But this must necessarily be completed by the statements about Mary, concentrated especially in numbers 285 to 288, and by all that relates to his vision of the church, the people of God, Bishop Victor Fernandez told me that what Francis wanted to say as being important about Mary, the most central part is the final part of the exhortation. So we have condensed Francis' thinking and his vision about the church. A church as outgoing people of God. And this is found in the whole of the exhortation. Francis always sees Mary, the church, and the woman as intimately linked themes. When the theme of the female face of Evangelii Gaudium was proposed to me, I had no doubt that there are three types of faces: the face of all women, the face of Mary, and the face of the church. All of them are feminine and are very present in the Pope's programmatic exhortation. Now, the Pope admires these three faces. And so I borrow many of the elements presented in a document on the woman. And I try to admire these three faces in a single contemplative face. So Mary is the icon of the church and of women. So Mary's face is the face of all women and the face of the church. And the patristic has always associated the church with the woman, a Virgin Mary, the spouse of the Lord, as Mary is. And these are two spouses of the Lord, and every human man, the church, Mary, and every human soul, and every feminine soul. And this is very powerful in the current pontiff's thinking. So making a link between these three faces can seem to be evident, but we know that in the light of the different feminist movements, the question now is becoming quite delicate, because the church is often accused of not taking into account, not having well received or sufficiently applied the cultural, social, and philosophical advances of these movements. Some Christian feminist theologians will say that women must be liberated from the Marian model and more generally from any classification of the feminine, which is quite common in Christian anthropology and in the thinking of recent pontiffs, including Francis. The reason why I'm saying this is because I cannot go into further details of all the problems, but I know that these are themes that are recurrent about feminist theology. We are therefore on a shifting or thorny ground. Some objections, which I cannot detail, refer to the fact that the Virgin Mary occupies a unique place in the history of salvation, that she received absolutely exceptional graces and prerogatives, so that she lived in a specific time and culture. Hence, the difficulty of presenting her as a model for the women of today. This is even more difficult if we think that the figure of Mary is generally associated with silence, concealment, obedience, resignation, and other attitudes that evoke more passivity and submission than the protagonism, freedom and autonomy that women with great merit and difficulty have conquered in today's society. Furthermore, it is said we consider the value of the undeniable evangelical virtues of Mary. We must recognize that they serve as an example not only for women, but also for men of all times. Similarly, there is a fair amount of mistrust, and so there is a fair amount of mistrust of the fact that discourse on women in the church is done by men, usually clerics. And when they exalt women, for example, by comparing them to the Virgin Mary, they do so to justify the secondary position they continue to give to concrete women in the daily life of our parishes and church organizations, without granting them important decision-making positions in a church fundamentally composed of women, but guided by men. The danger of the so-called women are wonderful effect is permanent, even in the theological and Mariological discourse. I know this and I do not deny it. We have to cope with this danger, but this is not denying. What then of my attempt as a man and a cleric to associate the female faces of Mary, the church and women? What about my attempt to contemplate them in unity? How do I approach the ecclesial understanding that associates Mary with the discourse on women, as St. John Paul II, for example, does in his encyclical Mulieris Dignitatem, in the understanding of the eternal truth about the human being, man and woman? The Polish Pope affirms that Christ, in fully revealing man to man, Gaudium et Spes 22, reserves a special place for the woman who was his mother, who has much to say to the church and to humanity about the dignity and vocation of women. Mary thus manifests the extraordinary dignity of women. I know that I'm addressing an organization that tries to keep into account all these perspectives of the last popes, but we are also aware of the difficulties to convey this message. Without claiming to answer all these questions, my intention is to present briefly the current pontiff's thinking on the relationship between Mary, the church, and women. Because of my Mariological formation and the doctorate I completed only 2 years ago, I have chosen to focus on the current pontiff's thinking on Mary and the church, and to draw the consequences of this understanding for the place of women in the church. In fact, the Pope has repeatedly called for a theology of the woman and has had the courage to denounce so many abuses committed against women in our time, both within the church, such as the case of religious working as if they were servants, so it's a permanent condemnation of clericalism, and outside the church against trafficking, for example. But on the other hand, it seems that Francis, as some of his critics say, does not take into account, those who are against him, does not take into account the vast production of post-conciliar feminist theology, and in reflecting on the role of women in the church, insists on associating women with Mary and the church. As critics say, but I do not agree with them, of course. I'm against detractors of Pope Francis because I think that the fact of associating Mary to women and to the church allows women, the church, to be better and for us to better understand how to live out the role that God has given to women in society. In general, I must say that the Mary Women Church Association does not diminish, but rather enhances the being and mission of women in the church and in society. This patristic analogy, which goes back to the beginnings of the church and has been constantly taken up by the last popes, neither cancels nor diminishes legitimate feminist claims and conquests, but can and must enlighten and complement them. I hope that the radiance of Mary's face will help to illuminate with the light of the Spirit, of which she is the full dwelling place, the face of every woman and of every church. Perhaps in this way, I can offer some clues to answer some right questions about feminism of various kinds, especially feminist theology. My aim is to open up for dialogue and to indicate possible avenues for reflection so that the various WUCWO member associations can continue to deepen these themes in these times of Francis' pontificate. Sorry for the long introduction, but I think that it was important to start off from a basis. We see the difficulties, but we want really to stress the pontiff's thinking, to study the applied Mariology of Francis. To begin to speak of Francis' Mariological thought, it is appropriate to start from the personal relationship he has with Mary. It is certain that on many occasions we have seen the Pope touch or embrace an image of Mary, pray silently before her, or kiss her. The tenderness of these gestures reveals something much deeper. Mario Bergoglio's sincere and filial love for the Virgin. Furthermore, it is necessary to understand the value of Pope Francis' theology of wisdom, which combines theology and spirituality with great spontaneity, whose divorce has often been denounced by modern theologians and mystics. This is why Bergoglio appreciates the way in which the faithful and holy people of God relate to God, Christ, Mary, and the saints. So sapiential theology. He greatly respected and was inspired by what the Aparecida document calls popular spirituality as the original way in which God leads his people, a spirituality which must not only be tolerated, but must be taken into account in all its saving value as a true theological place and cultural and sapiential expression of the people. That is to say, spirituality embodied in the culture of the simple, which does not mean that it is less spiritual, but it is otherwise. In truth, the theological reflection of Mary is important for Bergoglio if it is deeply rooted in the life of the Church. In people with the simple art, or as the Second Vatican Council teaches, in the totality of the faithful, who possess that supernatural sense which leads them to a universal consensus and not to allow themselves to be deceived in matters of faith and morals. Faith of the people of God, said the Pope in a homily to Saint Martha, is a simple faith which perhaps does not have much theology, but which carries within it a theology that is not mistaken because in it is found the Spirit. This is a reference to number 12. And the Pope explains, if you want to know who Mary is, Ask the theologian and he will tell you exactly who Mary is. But if you want to know how to love Mary, the people of God will teach you better. So the people have a sensitivity to understand Mary and the consequences of Mary's presence in our life. So the people are clearer than many theologians, and this is the reason why we have to listen to the people. Today, we see the commitment of the theology to consider the reasons of the art so that theology can become wisdom again. And this is also seen in Bergoglio's pontificate. His spirituality is not made up of harmonized energies, as he calls them, but of human faces, Christ, St. Francis, St. Joseph, Mary, and the faces of women. So this is just to say that his Mariology can be described as an applied Mariology. So insists on contact, on being in contact with the people of God, a living experience that he has done. So the aim of my doctoral thesis was to show how Jorge Bergoglio lived and learned to value popular Marian piety and Mariology in general through his family roots, the Latin American theological pastoral context and his close contact with the faithful people of God his close contact with the faithful people of God. This experience became a real contribution to the universal church and to the realization of his vision of the church. So Francis' theology influenced his life, and his life experiences influenced his theology. So this theme has much to do with his vision of the church. In presenting Bergoglio's relationship with the Virgin Mary, I decided to speak of experiences and discourses because he's lived out Mary, and there's a lot talked about Mary. God is revealed today, according to him, in experiences and the Pope's discourses. Now, if we compare this with the magisterium of Latin American theology in particular, and from here, the historic and theological to understand his theology and popular piety. Now, I move on to Mary Church, Mother of the Missionary People. From the theological systematic point of view, the study led me to the conviction that as far as Mariology is concerned, the underlying theological perspective, the mental framework from which Francis thinks and acts, is that of the intimate unity between Mary and the Church. In fact, one of the most important results of my research is, in my opinion, to have identified this Mariological mental framework or a central theological principle from which Bergoglio thinks and speaks of Mary. At the same time, I have identified some authors who have contributed to forming this theological systematic vision of the Pope. In the continuity of a long patristic tradition, these authors have rediscovered the importance of looking at Mary always in intimate unity with the Church, and vice versa. In the authors, who most influenced Bergoglio in adopting this ecclesiotypical Mariological perspective are Henri-Marie de Lubac, Isaac d'Estelle, John Paul II, and Hans von Balthasar. Unfortunately, due to lack of time, it is not possible to enter into further details. In the interview, I will only present one of them. In the interview that Francis gave me to talk about his relationship with Mary, he said, at a given moment, it's something I've deep inside me, isn't it? He said, showing his art, Isaac d'Estella from the monastery of Stella makes all these reflections. In fact, Cardinal Bergoglio first told me about Isaac d'Estelle when we worked together at the Aparecida conference in 2007. He asked me to save a text by this author, which he had proposed at the Synod on the Eucharist 2005, but which was not accepted in the final document of the Synod. He proposed it again in Aparecida, but without success. So much so that when he had the opportunity to write a pontifical text himself, he left it in Evangelii Gaudium. So when he had the opportunity to write a pontifical text himself, he left it in Evangelii Gaudium. As the dictation says, the third time is the good one. So he tried twice to make this text be accepted. So this is to stress the importance of such a text for him. Because of the importance of understanding the relationship between Mary, the woman, and the church in the Pope's thinking, I invite you to read the full text. At the foot of the cross, in the supreme hour of the new creation, Christ leads us to Mary. He leads us to her because he does not want us to walk without a mother. And for people to read in this motherly image all the mysteries of the gospel, the Lord is not happy that his church does not possess the feminine icon, which is the women face of Evangelii Gaudium. The Lord is not happy that his church does not possess the feminine icon. The intimate bond between Mary, the church, and each other faithful, insofar as in various ways they give birth to Christ, was beautifully expressed by blessed Isaac d'Estella. In a text he says, throughout his pontificate, Francis has repeated this idea many times. We must bear in mind that the church has the feminine article. She is feminine from her origins. The great theologian Urs von Balthasar worked a great deal on this theme. The Marian principle guides the church alongside the Petrine. But who is Mary and who is the church for the Pope? I would like to point out some theological concepts which, in my opinion, are the main ones for understanding Francis' vision, both with regard to Mary and the church. And all of this, before reading all the things that Francis has written, since he was a Jesuit until his pontificate, I have not read all of it, but all the Marian ideas are always the same. So who is Mary? Mary is, first of all, mother. She has a special relationship with the poor, with the people, which is expressed above all in popular Marian piety. And thirdly, Mary is the missionary disciple of Jesus, mother and model in the new evangelization to which Francis exhorted us all. And this is directly found in Aparecida. Mary's mother. At the end of the first interview I gave him, to briefly define his relationship with Mary, if you had to say, using one word, who is Mary? Mary is my mother. She's the only person I dare to cry with. She knows that with her, I feel I can cry. Mary is always amidst the people, and this is very clear to us. Where the people is, Mary is, but also in the great shrines, in the places of pilgrimages, where the people are, Mary is present. Mary, disciple, a missionary, like a good mother who watches over her children, may Mary teach us through her life what it means to be a disciple missionary. And as far as ecclesiology is concerned, we can also highlight three fundamental aspects, three definitions of the Church for Pope Francis: the Church as mother, the Church as people of God, and the missionary church. So in the case of Mary, the first idea is she's a mother, and the church is an outgoing church. A church being always in mission. I cannot enter into further details, but we can, you can read the text. So I dream of a church that is a mother and a missionary. Or in the second interview, when I think of the church is a soldier, and the children die saying, "Mama, Mama," they call their mother, don't they? Then it is the mother church that goes to this orphanage in a field hospital, the church as mother. Now, in the 1970s, Francis said, I started to speak of the holy people of God, and the expression that satisfies me most is an outgoing missionary church. This is present in Evangelii, Gaudium, and this is borrowed from Aparecida. Now, from the systematic and theological viewpoint, the conclusion is that there is a theological fundamental concept. Mary as the church, and we can make it shorter in comparing these fundamental principles. I try to find a synthesis to talk about Pope Francis and to express Pope Francis. First of all, we can see this unity according to de Lubac and Isaac de Stella, and then to consider the relationship between Mary and the Church as a unity in a bipolar tension, whose properties can be attributed to one or the other interchangeably. Mary as mother, as virgin, the Church as a virgin and mother, and each woman is called upon to do so, to be like that. Mother of the missionary people, which, in my opinion, so it's not a new invocation to be created for the Virgin Mary. This was not my intention, but I think when I think of both Mary and the Church, I think we can give both of them this title, Mother of the Missionary People. So Mary is the mother of the missionary people, and the Church is also mother of the missionary people. And there are consequences for us to understand the role of women in the Church. And so we have this parallel that I've made between Mary and the Church. So I'd like to stress that after this theological and systematic vision, I've tried to draw conclusions. I will only mention a few of them, not all of them, unfortunately. In my thesis, you can read all of them. But the first conclusion is what I've called the urgency of Marian Church. The Church of Marian popular faith with the consequences, and then the urgency of the social dimension of popular. And I'm going to deal with the third aspect, but there's a need also to talk about Marian option of the poor and the protagonism of the laity. But I will concentrate on the face of Mary illuminating the face of the church and this urgency for a Marian church. And then item 5, the face of Mary illuminates the face of women. And we talk about the feminine part of women and the consequences for the laity. So the face of Mary illuminates the face of the church. So there's an urgent need for a Marian church. And the Pope says so very clearly. The church is a mother with an open heart, and he emphasized the value of the pastoral motherhood of the whole people of God. And this has pastoral consequences. First of all, a church with the Marian attitude. So this is what the Pope wants. So i.e. a feminine and a maternal church. Marian attitudes are those that the gospel applies to Mary. So feminine attitudes like those of a mother. And also the feminine attitudes, all the feminine attitudes typical of a mother in a world that is a field hospital. What the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful, to be close to them. Pope Francis wants a church that is at once merciful, welcoming, strong, and tender. It is interesting to perceive that a woman is not feeble, is not fragile, a very tender woman, but strong at the same time. And then a Marian style of evangelization is the expression that Francis used in Evangelii Gaudium to designate Marian attitudes to evangelization. Numbers 284 and 288. Mary is the mother of evangelization, a model of many virtues for a missionary people. From her full availability to God to her capacity to suffer at the foot of the cross. So this is a special characteristic, is her tenderness. In the 2 books I've written, I focus on tenderness. It's always there, it's present. And Pope Francis shows what he calls the revolutionary the revolution of tenderness. This is very important. So I was asked to never forget of talking about tenderness. It was in my table of contents, and this is very important for Pope Francis. Another characteristic is a church with Marian attitudes, even in matters of evangelization, is a church which takes seriously its Marian profile and its pastoral consequences. So merciful, welcoming, strong and tender church. And Pope Francis always stresses the Marian face of this church, the welcoming of the word, not based on hierarchy, which has the tendency to define, to order. Benedict XVI also talked of bureaucratic church, which is not at all Marian, as he used to say. So it is based only on dogmas and doctrine. Here, what is stressed is the motherhood of the church. And the fourth dimension of this church is a church that has to present a correct image of Mary, must be an integrated and complete image. Starting off from the Bible and integrating everything within the faith of the church. So within the church. This gives us security and completes the partial visions often found in Marian piety. And Mary's presence in the lives of peoples as an integrating factor for the human. So Mary, the mother of the Brazilian people, and the faith of the people as well. I will not go into further details, but I will stress Mary's face illuminating the women's face. Pope Francis dedicated a large part of the gospel to the social of the Evangelii Gaudium to the social dimension of evangelization. The Marian aspect of the church also has a social implications. Some authors have studied the importance of Mary and the Marian piety for society in general and for the church. And this Marian option for the poor, Pope Francis is aware of this, appreciates it, and draws the consequences. And in fact, in addition to expressing itself in the face of Mary and the church, the feminine face of Evangelii Gaudium manifests itself in the faces of the concrete women who are part of the people of God through baptism, to which the Pope devotes paragraphs 103 and 104. Well, I'm sure that you know these paragraphs by heart, and I don't think there's a need to elaborate more on them. So I will move on to very quickly, because I'm sure that you're familiar with these paragraphs where the Pope talks about the indispensable contribution of women. They have special qualities and capacities, attention to other people, women's attention to others, attention to life, and I know the importance of spaces for women within the church. The Pope recognizes the equal dignity between men and women and the specific differences between the two. So there's a need to enhance differences as well. And we have many documents stressing this dimension. And so the value of women ingenuousness, John Paul II said so to refer to the typical qualities of women, but always in a vision where there's no juxtaposition between men and women, but there's a reciprocity instead. So it's a reciprocity, it's complementarity, reciprocity. So these are elements that we know very well and which are present in numbers 103 and 104. In 104, it mentions priesthood reserved for man. This is a function of service. So priesthood is a function of service among the people of God, and not a question of dignity or holiness. And Pope repeats something that he has mentioned in other texts. Mary is more important than apostles. So woman in the church is more important than the bishops. And then the Pope deepens this idea. And I think that what I've understood is that it is what is most important is ecclesial dignity, and not only the ecclesiastical dignity of women. Women have a possible place in the various spheres of the church, and the Pope always says that there's a need to give concrete tasks to women. One thing does not deny or rule out the other, but I realize that the Pope here refers much more to not living, to be contented with our roles. There's a need to avoid disoriented feminism. And behind this, there's since the time where it was a Jesuit, and due to the problems in Argentina with Catholicism at that time, Pope is against ideologies. He has a sort of allergy against ideologies. So avoid ideologies. And he says, and he told me a sentence, if without Mary and appropriate understanding of women and without the motherhood of both of them, the whole church will lack motherhood, because without a mother, the church will fall. And this is the reason why the salvation of the Marian femininity of women is one of the major attitudes in Francis' thinking. Mary is a guarantee for the greatness of women, says Lina Boff. The force of the feminine is huge, and this should be assumed by the femininity of Mary, though the understanding of women is not to be reduced to her motherhood. So there's a need to understand the importance of this motherhood, physical motherhood and spiritual motherhood. So it's not a question of making women mothers, because motherhood is typical of women, but also spiritual motherhood. So he often said that religious sisters are mothers, and they have to live out this motherhood, without which she is an old maid. Now, the space for women in the church, the Pope is not mentioning a position, a function, and Linda Ghisoni plays a very important part in our dicastery as to the participation of laity in the church. But this is a Marian attitude, and he uses many examples to talk about this. So we have to talk to the woman as women. There's a need to make difficult decisions. So there's a need to elaborate a deep theology of women. So once a priest Francis often cites a negative example of women's participation, which is said to have happened in Switzerland. A pastoral referentin would not let a priest celebrate the funeral of his own father, because that week it was her turn to celebrate the funeral in the parish of that priest's father. So this was imbalance in understanding the roles reserved for women, and the value of women therefore goes far beyond these functions. And this is what the Holy Father wants to stress. So the contribution of women is first of all in the how, in the human and spiritual and even mystical attitudes that women can bring to the church and to society. And now I will get to my conclusions, because I took too much of your time, but I think that these examples are important to understand the Pope's thinking. And the Pope says that it is typical he mentioned the particular tiredness of the art. This is found in Redemptoris Mother. It has to do with the human attitudes and spiritual attitudes of women. And he says the importance of women in the church is not functional, nor is it ministerial. I believe that it goes to the dimension of Mary. there is a phrase that touches me a lot, that I've never understood well, but I look for it and it makes a good noise. I also put it in the exhortation to make noise to others. Mary is the one who knows how to read the event with the promise in the light of the history of salvation. She knows how to read. This attempt to interpret what happened to her, so many contradictions in the light of faith, produces in her, says John Paul II, a particular fatigue of the art. And this is found also in Evangelii Gaudium. This is part of the human, of the woman face. This is typical of women. It is normal for a mother to be tired, to endure. And I tell you, he said to me, and he showed me the case of the mother of a trade unionist. And I follow my text. At this point of the interview, the Pope tells me the case of the mother of an alcoholic trade unionist who went out early every day to work and looked at him with concern and tenderness. One day, the trade unionist couldn't stand that look anymore and decided to change his life. And the Pope concluded, "Do you realize she who is tired is able to guide us? She's the one who convinces, despite the complicated life of her son, she accompanied him. She did not agree with him, but she has the ability to convince, like Mary at Cana. There's something maternal about this, and her look convinced the son to change his life. So the look is central, is very important. And he discovered that people used to be different when they passed through the image of Mary. So they confessed these people big sins. So these people passed to the image of Mary, and Mary had touched their hearts. So Mary, as mother, had changed her heart. So the Virgin Mary was there, like a mother, accompanying her children to prison, for example. We see the lines of mothers visiting their children in prison, and they say, he's my son, though the son is imprisoned. So there's something of this motherhood. And this is the sentence that he repeats, the particular fatigue of the art of reading events, including the atrocities. And this is more possessed by women than men. So these are the mystical attitudes that the Pope stressed about women. And I should like to conclude using a statement by the Pope to show what women make as a contribution to the church. So a Marian feminine presence, maternal presence within the church. On February 22nd, 2019, on the second day of the meeting on the protection of minors in the church, the Pope made a memorable intervention following the presentation by Dr. Linda Ghisoni and the Secretary for the Lay Faithful at the Dicastery for the Laity, Family and Life. In response to a question from the Assembly, Dr. Ghisoni compared the pain of childbirth to the pain generated by abuse. The former, she said, the former generates life, the latter leads to death. At this point, the Pope asked to speak. 6 bishops had already spoken, and he until then had said nothing. He expressed himself spontaneously. Listening to Dr. Ghisoni, and I quote, I heard the church speak for herself. I mean, we all talked about the church in all the speeches, but this time it is the church herself speaking. It is not just a question of style, the female genius that is reflected in the fact that the church is a woman. To invite a woman to speak is not to enter into the modality of ecclesiastical feminism, because in the end, all feminism ends up being a machismo in skirts. No, to invite a woman to speak about the wounds of the church is to invite the church to speak about herself, about the wounds she has. And I believe that this is the step we must take with great strength. The woman is the image of the church, who is woman, who is a wife, who is mother, a style. Without this style, we would be talking about the people of God, but as an organization, perhaps a union, but not as a family born of the mother church. And he makes the link between these 3 things. The logic of Dr. Ghisoni's thinking was that of a mother, and she ended with the story of what happens when a woman gives birth to a child. It is the feminine mystery of the church that she is wife and mother. It is not a question of giving more roles to women in the church. Yes, that is good, says the Pope, but that is not how the problem is solved. It is a question of integrating women as figures of the church into our reflection. And he says, and what he confirmed, that to think also about the church with the categories of women. So this is how he thinks about the church, using the categories of women. And he thanked Linda Ghisoni for her testimony. And I should like to thank you for your patience, because I was long, and I hope I was able to say all the things I would have liked to say, and hope I did not make life difficult for translators. So thank you very much for this very beautiful commentary on the exhortation. And thank you for helping us to live out as women. And we would like to make the contagion with all those around us with these characteristics and qualities of Mary. And this is the Pope proposes us, and you explained this very well. It's a treasure for WUCWO, all the things you've just shared with us. The board members now, and also people listening to us via Facebook. Father Jerry, I don't know whether you have questions, and I do hope that these questions can get to me using the chat room, or board members can raise your hands if you have any questions. And while they're writing, well, I'd like to ask you a question. And now, considering that you've accorded us a longer speaking time, I'd like to know whether Linda Ghisoni, if she were not the Undersecretary of the Dicastery, she couldn't have attended that meeting, and she couldn't have addressed all the bishops' conferences, and this light would have been lost. This light that the Pope gives on the church. So I dare to ask you, now, starting off from what you said about the roles of women within the church, if you had to tell us how the church today could increase, could make the most of these women in the image of the Virgin Mary, for them to serve within the church, not to have important functions or positions, but to help the church to move. What can this service be within the church for women? As I said, I think that the Pope insists so much on the fact that it's not a question of functions or positions, but it's a question of attitudes. And we're very often mentioning the importance of these attitudes. But in his pontificate, he does not deny the role of women and is trying to give important roles to women. So it is true that there's a need to follow him, and we have to introduce women in all the roles reserved for the laity. And this has been done with the dicastery of communication to have a woman prefect. He tried. And there's a need to increase these positions and functions for women to be able to make their contributions within their church. But at the same time, there's a need to reduce clericalism. So there's a need to attribute more roles, decision-making roles to women, and change the mindset or eliminate the mindset according to which there's a clericalism. So priesthood, as in Evangelii Gaudium number 104, priesthood is a service. So priestly roles should be less important. So more space should be left to the feminine presence. And when there's no need for a priest or a bishop, well, this function should be given to a woman. And in a spirit of synodality, bishops and priests should accept to be complemented by women laity who could integrate their vision and could help them in the functions of their ministries. So it's a place of service. And this can be seen in every case, but all places can be places of service where there's no need to have a priest or a bishop. This place could be accorded to a woman in dioceses, for example. Women could be present. Or in the US, there are many women playing a very important role in dioceses as chancellors or in an ecclesiastical tribunal. Linda is a judge as well. So there's a need to revise the roles, including the priestly roles, and maybe priests would be accorded less roles if there were a revision of roles. Thank you very much, Father. Thanks a lot for answering this question. You know that we are in full agreement with you. We fully agree with you. And of course, we fully agree with the Holy Father as well. So we would really like to help the Church. So there are people who would like to make comments. And I should like to hand over to Miriam from Colombia. Thank you very much, Father. I'm moved because you've reached out art as women, and you've given a lot of value to this richness that God has given to women. I really liked the example of Mary's look at his son, and this is a meditation for all of us as missionary disciples to have the same gestures. when we are on mission, we are sent out to missioning. This richness should get out of ourselves. How to cultivate, how to grow this richness. It's only in merit we can find everything. You've invited us to do so. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful. It has been a very beautiful gift for WUCWO. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Father. I don't know whether Father Jerry has something to say. By way of conclusion, would you like to say something, Father?
I'm delighted with the talk. Thank you so much, Father Alexandre. I think we will have a lot to reflect about, a lot to digest from your talk. I wonder if in WUCWO we might find other occasions to study something of the text that Father Alexandre has produced. So better that I not say much, let's hear from the other women, but perhaps any further point on the Marian face of evangelization. I must confess, I'm not familiar with that part of Evangelii Gaudium. I'm embarrassed to say. So I'm thinking of the concrete relevance of this notion, let's say for our members of WUCWO who work at parish level and who are doing great work, service of the poor, of course. So the question of how might they deepen a sense that they are Marian evangelizers in the work they do?
Is that a question, right?
Yes.
Creo que es un tema muy importante de continuar reflexionando porque el Papa...
This is a very important theme and we have to think about it more and more. When the Pope says Mary as Mother of Evangelization, we find this in number 6 in Evangelii Nuntiandi by John Paul II, and Pope Francis says that all the attitudes of Mary, that every woman has to take, the fact that Mary is a disciple and missionary, and the woman follows the Lord. She's a disciple. This is the fundamental quality of Mary, and this has to be taken up by every evangelizing member. So when we are disciples, we have to be turned into missionaries, and we have to consider the mission as being part of the people of God, because the people of God is a missionary, and the missionary people is amongst other people. This is another characteristic of Latin American church. So the attitude of Mary, her voice, her attitude to follow the Christ, her availability, her being available when she puts herself at the service of Elizabeth. These are the characteristics of a Marian evangelizer. So being tender and strong at the same time, she's mother. So she has a maternal attitude in evangelization, but this should not be imposed. Evangelization should not be imposed by force, but you evangelize as if you were a mother. This is the characteristic of Marian evangelization, and this is very important to understand the reason why Pope Francis will be known as the Pope of Mercy, the merciful Pope, because he speaks about the typical attitudes of a woman. So the church should be maternal, merciful, welcoming, and not be seen as a judge, as imposing moral or doctrine or bureaucracy on other people. So it has to accompany life and be open up to life as a mother does. And we have to walk together. And these are the characteristics of Marian evangelization. But of course, there's a need to think about them. Thank you very much for the commentaries that we found on the chat room. The importance of women in the formation of priests. This is central in the new Ratio Educandi. We have this aspect, and in the synod on the youth, so we talked about this as well. So women need to be integrated in the formation of priests, and also in the orientations given to bishops, to parishes. Thank you very much, Father. I don't know whether you would like to read the comments by Virginia Ribeiro by Venezuela in the chat room. Sometimes she has not very good connection. I don't know whether you would like to add something to what she writes in the chat room. Otherwise, we're going to conclude. So Virginia talks about our society in Latin America. Characteristic of our being Catholic, we are very Marian, and this is a huge opportunity for evangelization. Now, the Pope stresses very much the importance of popular spirituality, and we have to make the most of this. So we have to stress the feminine face of the Church, which is manifest in the popular piety. And we, the priests, we have to learn with you. And the Pope says that women are much more independent and autonomous than priests. They organize pilgrimages, prayerful moments, and they do things independently of their parish priests. So we very much rely upon you. So thank you very much. So we could continue all the day long, but we know that you can't. So in the name and on behalf of all WUCWO women, and in the name and on behalf of all the women that have followed us through Facebook from Spain and other countries as well, Winnie also writes in English. So we have to conclude here, and we do hope that as soon as possible we can think about this formation, and we would like it to be incarnated. We would like to be this feminine face of the Church that the Pope wants us to be, with the Church, with the Holy Spirit. So we're going to continue once again this dialogue. So the dicastery would like to rely upon WUCWO in order to bring about this change in the mindset. So we rely upon you. So please help us change this current mindset based on clericalism, on machismo within the Church, making this Marian and feminine contribution that you, the WUCWO women, you can make.